Welcome, everyone, producers, engineers, and guests. This is another Audiocydal music learning segment. And today, we're here to help answer the age old question, which came first, the compressor or the EQ? Which came first, the compressor or the EQ? All right, so let's go ahead and dive right in, right? So when we talk about which came first, the compressor or the EQ, okay, we're really talking about the plugins, okay? And plugins are the features that you can add to, all right, tracks as you're mixing them, right? So this particular track here, let's just pick this. Okay, on this track here, in this instance, we are using the EQ first, as you see, right? So when you use the EQ first, right, what you're doing there is you're able to gain clarity and presence over your song. Okay, what I'm meaning is that you can adjust the lows. Okay, you want to adjust the low tones for your bass. Okay, here's your mid range. You may want to adjust, raise or lower the tone or intensity of your mid range, maybe for a vocal. Okay, and then on the far right, you have your highs. So you're able to adjust the tone or intensity of the highs of the snare and the violin. Okay, all right. So once you adjust that, if you adjust it properly, you should end up with a nice concurrent wave, right? It's a nice sound wave if you do your EQ like that, all right? And that's fine. You want to do EQ first. When you do it that way, you're trying to establish clarity and presence and control over your tone of your lows, mids, and highs, right? Now, if I add compression, if I come right behind that with a compressor on top of that, right? What's going to happen is, based on the threshold that I have set, right? Based on my gain, and most specifically the threshold I have set, which is at what point I want the compressor to take action. Whenever these levels or decibels that I have EQ, whenever they reach that threshold, okay, these curves will be flattened out because the compressor is going to do its job. It's going to flatten out this EQ. So the bottom line is that if you apply compression after your EQ, the compressor is going to come along and it is going to impact your EQ settings. All right. So if you had a nice round wave of a sound, that EQ coming behind it, it's clearly going to look for any sounds beyond a certain decibel. All right. And it's going to filter it down and flatten out that curve. All right. Now, once again, it's not good or bad. We're just talking about the science of how this works. Okay. If you do it in that particular order, right? Okay. So let's take another example. Let's look at an instance of EQ coming second. So we'll look at a compressor coming first. Let's look, we got a track here. Here we go. We got a track where the compression is taking place first, and then we do the EQ later. All right, so here we go. So one of the things with compression, why do we use it? Well, just really quick, we cover this well in depth in our mixing course. We really go deep with compression because it's tons of information out there on this too. But for this example, just in general, if you talk about a compressor or using compression, what you're looking to do is, number one, prevent any clipping. And clipping is if you have parts of your song that are just going beyond the regular decibels of the rest of the song. Maybe you have a certain part where instrument just really spikes up far beyond the sound level of all of the rest of the song, and it really stands out and takes away from the song, right? And in most cases, when it does that and you turn it up, it can cause distortion. So one of the key things that compression can do is, once you set your threshold and your ratio, all right, so if I'm using a 3-to-1 ratio, if my signal goes 3 decibels beyond the threshold, then it will filter it down so that you'd only hear 1 decibel higher, right? So that's what this ratio really does here for us. And this is what you might call like I would say like a mild or a low compression, right? And the other thing with compression will help do is balance out and the dynamics of the song, as well as kind of fuse the sounds together. So for instance, what you're able to do with compression, it helps to lower the sounds, right? Or compress the sounds that are really peaking really high, right? And once you lower those higher sounds that are just peaking really high, the lower parts of the song can kind of come up and then they'll kind of meet and they'll kind of be able to be fused together. That's the whole point of that, to kind of make the whole track sound even. So if you're looking to prevent clipping and let the track make the track sound even, okay, then that's what you're using a compressor for, okay? Now, if we use the compressor first, which we have here, and we come back and add an EQ right on top of that compressor, right, it's going to impact our compressor settings. And how? This is a perfect example. For instance, if I remember here, right here on the left is our bass, our low end, right? So let's just say I want to EQ it and I just really boost my bass up. What's going to happen now, the settings that I have for my threshold and my ratio and my gain, all of these are now going to be impacted, right? Because I apply compression before I EQ'd it. But here I'm boosting the signal by raising the tone of my bass. So it's going to impact my sound settings that I've already established with my compressor. Once again, it's not a bad thing. You're just understanding the science, right? So now we've seen that one impacts the other based on how you apply them, right? Now we still want to answer though, now that we know how they work, right? But we still want to find out which should come first, the compressor or the EQ. We know that they impact each other, but is it really one that we should be using first to get the best sound? Well, let's take a look at that and see. Let's look a little deeper into this. Now, there are instances, right? And I would say even purposes for putting the EQ first, right? As I mentioned before, depending on what I'm mixing or what sound I'm mixing, right? I may very well want to do EQ first. And a good example could be for vocals, right? So if I really want to control the clarity and the presence of a vocal, okay, then I would start with the EQ first, right? I want to make sure that I have the right low end tone set. Maybe it's a soprano singer, right? So I want to make sure that on my high end that I have those set to give the best tone as possible, right? And then maybe I'm making sure my low end is not taken away from that soprano, right? But either way, right, I would definitely probably use a EQ first just to get the clarity and the presence over my vocals, right? And then I will come back and add the compression just to kind of make sure I'm controlling any high notes that just kind of go outside of the regular range of the rest of the song, right? But vocals is a good reason that one might use an EQ and then compression, right? But when would a person use probably compression first and then an EQ? Okay. Well, I can think of one example. Say, for instance, if you are EQing, say, drums. All right. So drums have, many different parts. You got your bass drum, your snare, your kick. All right. So I may want to add the compression first, right, to immediately gain control of the levels, right, and to be able to blend all those sounds together. Because say if I'm doing drums are going to be more of the dominant instrument. So I may want to jump right out front and get control and kind of tame those instruments by setting the proper ratio and threshold, but just adding the compression so that the drum sounds even, right? Because for the most part, depending on the song, the drum is going to be maybe the main part of the song going most of the time. So I want to have that even. So in that instance, I would probably go ahead and add the compressor first to get a nice smooth level of all my sound. And then I'll come back to EQ it, right? Because then I can go ahead now and kind of have more control then, or the final say, as I like to say, over the tone and the final dynamics and the presence of the song there, right? So in this instance, this would just be me EQing or EQing after the fact and compression first because it's drums. So basically just giving you a couple examples when you might want to apply either of these. Okay. So from this, you see it's truly not really a right or a wrong, not necessarily good or bad. It's just understanding when to use these, right? So one of the things I want to mention to you, right? Now that we know that they impact one another, right? But there are ways to manage the impact they have on one another, right? So here's an example. Say, for instance, I've seen several engineers, senior engineers, that will do this to manage the impact. So say, for instance, right, that they apply an EQ first on a track, all right, and they're coming back and they're adding a compressor, all right? So we have the EQ first, then a compressor on the top of it, right? So we already know that if you EQ first and you have a nice little EQ wave, we know what happens, right? You put a compressor on it, that compressor is going to impact that wave and probably flatten out quite a bit of it, right? So we've already known that, right? But what senior engineers, many of them will do to help manage that impact is they'll come back after they've applied the compressor, and then they'll just go ahead and add another EQ after that compressor, right? Which I think is smart. All right. So you EQing it first initially, because once again, when you're EQing first, if you're EQing first, you're trying to really gain the clarity and the presence, right? And then you come back with the compressor to kind of control and level out the sound. But since the compressor is going to impact that initial EQing that you did, you come back with another EQ after the fact to kind of help you once again gain the final say on that track, and then you can able to kind of go back and reestablish the tone and the structure of the sound by being able to EQ it afterwards. Okay. Now, outside of doing it this way, if you're very good at keeping up with the and tracking the decibels in which you're EQing in and the decimals of your threshold and your ratio and gain, then it's possible that you can learn how to use these tools where they don't impact and don't clash with one another. In other words, if you're able to keeping track of your decibel ranges, you can maybe try to mix within a range or set your compressor within a range that doesn't impact your EQ and vice versa. However, if that's too complex for you, you can simply add another EQ afterwards. And I've seen tons of many producers do that, or many engineers do that, and the songs came out great. All right. So this is just another way to kind of mitigate, if you will, the impact that compression can have on an EQ. All right. So after seeing this, once again, just want to let you know that from what we study here, it's no right or wrong. It really depends on the track you're mixing, your creativity, and the engineer's ear. Okay. And once again, we definitely on always encourage you guys to look up the terms, okay, of EQ and compression. We by no means stand to be experts on any of these subjects. We just like learning these subjects and applying them, and we share them with you as we learn them and perfect them. Okay. But that answers our question: which came first, the EQ or the compressor? Well, it depends on which one you want to come first or go first. Depends on your mix, your track, your creativity, and the engineer's ear, right? So once again, look these terms up, all right? And we'll be right back at you with some more training segments as well. And please look out for the mixing course, which we'll have available for you also. Okay, once again, this is Audiocydal Music, helping you answer the question, which came first, the EQ or the compressor? Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye now.